I understand that our first witness for the day would be happy to be called Martin.
That's correct, sir.
Martin, please.
Please state your full name.
Martin Keith Macleod.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely.
I do solemnly, sincerely.
And truly declare and affirm.
And truly declare and affirm.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Martin, you're here to talk about your late father, Keith.
Yes.
And we've got a picture of him that we're going to put up on the screens while you give your evidence. Thank you. And we've also had statements from your mum and your sister, and so we're going to draw on those as well.
Yes.
You've all described your dad as a very outgoing, gregarious person. And he worked as a publican?
That's correct, yes.
And I think you want to say a little bit more about what your dad was like.
Yes. He was very hardworking, a very good family man, loving husband, fantastic father and grandfather. Before his ill health, Dad was very outgoing. He was born in the East End of London and Mum and Dad left London to have family, and they followed their dream and ended up running a village pub in Devon. It's a very successful business. Dad never lost his East End accent, so wherever we went, anywhere in Devon, people would say, "How long are you down here for?" And he would go, "I've been down here for years. I've been, doing all this and doing all that." And so it's because he had that accent, he had that energy. You always knew that where he was and what he was doing. He really enjoyed village life. He really got into that with local sports. He would support the sort of schools and all those sorts of things. He was very respectful and appreciative of his customers as well. He ran his business. He was the king of his business. And as children, remember, it used to take us ages to walk anywhere with him because people would stop and chat, either in the village or in the local town or in the city, anywhere. And my mum and sister were on a holiday in Tenerife with him once, and someone goes, "Hello, Keith," and then a customer on a broad, and Dad would always stop and chat. And as kids, you just had to wait patiently, let him finish speaking to his customers, and then you carry on with your business.
Your dad had problems with his knees and underwent arthroscopies on several occasions in the late 1980s. And then in October 1988, when he had a procedure, he developed a chronic infection in the knee. Mm-hmm. And he ended up requiring a knee replacement operation, which took place on the 20th of May, 1991.
Correct, yes.
And it's during that operation that he was given a blood transfusion.
That's right.
At the time of the operation, as far as you're aware, was your father even aware that he'd had a blood transfusion?
He was not aware. Back in those days, when you had a knee replacement, it was standard procedure. It was routine to have a blood transfusion. The focus at the time, because the infection was really quite savage, and Dad's knee had essentially fused and needed to be removed and replaced, and that the blood transfusion didn't come into it. It was the replacement of the knee that was the focus. So Dad really wasn't aware, and if it had been mentioned in passing, would certainly have not had anything, understood anything of any risks or of infections or transfusions that would bring.
As far as he was concerned, subsequently it was simply a routine matter that he'd been transfused.
Yes.
He then had 2 further knee replacements, and did he receive a transfusion on either of those occasions?
No. The practice of transfusion during blood knee replacements or knee replacements had ceased shortly after his operation.
Your dad then received a letter from the National Blood Service. It's dated the 31st of July 1995, and we're going to have a brief look at it. It's something we've seen with other witnesses, sir. It's 2028004, please. And we can see in the second paragraph that your dad was informed that they'd now discovered that the blood that he'd been given may have been carrying an infection known as hepatitis C. What was your dad's reaction to receiving that letter?
He was bemused by this letter. He didn't recall having a blood transfusion. This is some years after that knee replacement operation and subsequent operations. And it says in the letter that it was at Musgrove Park Hospital, and he'd never had an operation at Musgrove Park Hospital. So the location that stated on the letter was incorrect. So he, to start off with, didn't understand where this had come from.
We can see at the top of the letter that there's some handwriting, and you've identified that as your dad's handwriting.
Yes.
With the date of the 9th of August.
Yes.
What's your understanding about that?
That is the date that he went for the blood test. So the initial blood taken for it to be tested to see if he was infected.
Your understanding is that your dad had done as the letter had requested and telephoned the National Blood Service, the phone number that was provided, to make an appointment with Dr. Anderson for tests to be done.
Correct, yes.
Before we leave the letter, we can see in the first paragraph that Dr. Anderson was writing with the agreement of your dad's general practitioner. And you've obtained your father's medical records, and there are two letters that predate this one, dealing with the similar issues. If we look at 2028003, please. This is a letter to the orthopaedic surgeon. And if we look at the first paragraph, we can see that the transfusion service has been reviewing the records of previous donations from donors now known to be infected with hepatitis C, and the health departments have decided that the recipients of blood originating from these donors should be traced so they may be offered appropriate counselling, testing and follow-up, including consideration of treatment. And there's then a reference to your dad having been transfused with red cells on the 18th of January 1991. We know that's the wrong date because his surgery was the 20th of May 1991.
Yes.
But then at the bottom of the page, we can see that the orthopaedic surgeon had the option of whether he counselled your father or whether it went back to the GP. And in this letter, the orthopaedic surgeon declined to address it himself.
Yes.
And then if we look at 2028007, we can see, thank you, we can see the letter that went to the GP, which again sets out that the health departments have decided to trace relevant people. And we see that in the second paragraph of the letter, the date is correct for your dad's transfusion, but the hospital is still wrong.
Yes.
And then it says, in accordance with the health department's guidance, third paragraph, the patient will need to be approached with a view to counselling and testing. And then the next paragraph, there is I would be grateful if you'd complete the enclosed questionnaire in relation to your father. And what you think happened was that, in fact, the GP didn't complete the questionnaire, but that the blood service completed the questionnaire.
That's right, the author of the original letter of invitation to Dad. We believe that was the person that filled in the questionnaire.
And we can see that on document 014.
Well, just before we
course.
leave that, could we just have a look at the end of that letter?
Yes, sir.
I had been wondering, given the tone of this letter, which says what's going to be done, why the earlier letter to your father said that it was with the consent of, writing with the consent of the general practitioner. So presumably this is the only reference to any form of consent.
Yes,
Otherwise,
sir.
it's just a form of words.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes.
So then we then go to 014, which is the... I'm sorry, sir, I'm incorrect. There is another reference to consent, and it's on 014. It was where I was going next. Apologies. We can see a letter from Dr. Anderson of the National Blood Service to the GP, and it says with reference to our telephone conversation regarding this gentleman. So it appears there was a telephone conversation between the GP and the National Blood Service, and hence the letter to your father with the agreement of the GP. Attached, sorry, yes.
I think I mean, chronologically, the invite was the 31st of July for the test, and this is following those tests.
Absolutely.
Right, okay. Thank you.
And what we have attached to this letter is the results of copies of the results and the counselling form, which is what we're going to look at. If we turn to page 4 of this exhibit, we can see at the top that it's been completed by Dr. Anderson. So it's been completed in the National Blood Service rather than by the GP.
Yes.
And we can see the date of the counselling visit as the 9th of August 1995. And your understanding is that on that date, your dad simply went for a blood test.
Yes, just to take some blood in order to confirm whether or not he was infected.
As far as you're aware, was there any other discussion about hepatitis C at that stage?
No, there may well have been just an introductory as to, thank you for coming, and this is, what we're about to do. But it was the blood test was taken, and that was it. It was a matter of minutes.
If we go down to the bottom of this page, there's a question that has been completed. Does the patient have any other potential risk factors for hepatitis C? Other transfusion, tick if appropriate. And we can see that all the boxes have been ticked. Other transfusion episodes. Had your father had any other transfusions?
No.
History of injecting drug use?
No.
Occupational exposure to blood?
No.
And history of skin piercing?
No.
Did your father see Dr. Anderson again after the 9th of August? As far as you're aware?
I don't think so, because I think the results came via his GP.
So you're left rather puzzled why those boxes were ticked?
Yes, we have. If Dad was asked those questions, of course he would deny them. He would say that, Dad has never tried drugs. He's the most vanilla person. He would not have anything like that. Skin piercings, my sister recalls, he just thought they looked odd on men. He was just not something he would do. He's a landlord of a pub, and his history, his employment history, shows no suggestion of exposure to blood. And we know that the only blood transfusion he had was unfortunately that one on the day when we had the knee replacement.
When your dad was told that he had hepatitis C, you've said it haunted him for the rest of his life. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Those initial meetings, there's just some key things that really, sort of lodged in his mind and sent him, into, panic almost. Talking about what to do if he was spilled blood, if there was a blood spillage, that even when, years later, when we have, grandchildren are born, if Dad ever cut himself, and was always a practical man, so he would do DIY, he would do these things, he would send us out the room. He would not allow anyone to touch him. And that stayed with him forever.
At the beginning, he used his own towels, his own
Yes.
flannel, and
Yes.
at one point his own knife and fork.
Yes, because he shaved. He was concerned with regards to any sort of blood in the house. And so, yeah, absolutely used his own towels, flannels, cutlery. He even asked us all to, he gave us all boxes of latex gloves to have in our homes just in case. He cut himself.
Were your parents ever offered any counselling following his diagnosis?
No.
And you object to the terms of those letters we've looked at where it describes counselling, because in your view that wasn't true counselling.
No, it's not what we know today, and I don't think it's, it just doesn't reflect. I don't think Dad was in the room when that form was completed. I think it was afterwards. It was because obviously of the inaccuracies on there. There was no support. There was no. It seems that the blood service exercise, the look-back exercise, and the testing was a transactional piece of work where they, contacted the individual, tested the individual, confirmed the individual is infected, ticked, and then just moved on to the next person. And it just feels that there was no support for them to suggest. And we've seen in, obviously letters and things that counselling took place. It's just, it's offensive to us because that form was on Dad's records, on his GP records for 21 years. And there were opportunities for people to review that. And we don't know if that affected anyone's decision on the care that he was offered. We don't know if it changed their opinion of him. He was very concerned about being thought of as someone that had brought this on upon themselves, that had some sort of immoral or illicit behaviour. And sometimes you'd think, it's you're being paranoid, but then you see that these are actually on his records, and maybe he wasn't so paranoid.
Your dad was referred up to Musgrave Hospital, and there was a consultation in the October following his diagnosis. What were your parents told about telling anybody about his infection?
They were advised not to tell anyone other than medical professionals that they encountered, and that was especially hard for Dad because Dad was never a secret keeper. He couldn't keep secrets. He wasn't. If you asked Dad how he was, you got to know how he was. He would tell you everything. And sometimes you're like, okay, but if you ask the question, we would tell friends and family, you ask him how he is, you're going to know. So to avoid people asking him how he was, he would withdraw from social events, from village life. He kept himself to himself. He initially had the knee that he could talk about, and people would say, how is your knee, Keith? Then that's fine. But if it was a more general question, he would rather not be there to have to lie. And he felt very protective of his family. My sister, Suzanne, was still at school when they were informed. In a village, news like this can, escalate. It can go across the village. Mum and Dad didn't have the business anymore, but they still lived in the village where Mum and Dad had the pub, so they were known. And it was very difficult for that to for the family to have that as a secret.
Your dad also felt particularly upset that when he was at the hospital that he had red dots on his medical records. Why was that?
The red dots on the outside of medical folders would indicate infectious, and Dad would see the change in someone's demeanour, in their attitude, their response, and he felt dirty. He felt that he was being judged. And it was because it was for all to see. If you're walking down the corridor in a public area, he just felt infected, the infected. And so he really did not appreciate that at all.
And there was one particular occasion where a doctor said something to him that made him feel even worse.
Yes. He
Do you
was
want to tell us about
staying
that?
in a hospital at the time, and this doctor came in and said, well, if you caught this, through your, your misspent youth. And that's, so it was making it as a joke. And Dad had the greatest of respect for doctors. He couldn't argue with the doctor or put the doctor straight. But he rung Mum and he was very upset. And Mum actually got in her car, came down to the hospital, and demanded an apology from that doctor. She got an apology from the ward or the management of the ward, not from that doctor. But yeah, he just couldn't. He did not appreciate being thought of in that way.
So you've described in your statement your dad struggling with the stigma, but also the fear that hepatitis C brought. And that fear didn't just haunt your dad, it also haunted your sister.
Yes.
And we've got permission for you to tell us what happened when she had given birth to her twins.
Yes, sorry. Suzanne gave birth to two lovely girls, but fell quite ill, and was really quite poorly. And this is, and they said that she needed a blood transfusion. And having experienced the difficulties and the trauma of seeing what this has done to Dad, my sister, who adored Dad, she point blank refused. She was not having it, and a number of medical staff were trying to persuade her because it was in her best interest. She was ill. She needed this, and she would not have it. So Dad somehow caught wind of that, got straight in the car, came over, persuaded people to let him in outside of visitor hours, and sat at Suzanne's bed and talked it through and persuaded her. Persuaded her she was going to be okay. And only when Suzanne heard those words did she allow the transfusion to take place.
Before we talk about your dad's treatment and what happened after that, there's one other set of documents that you've pulled out from your dad's records that you wanted to take us through. And that is the hepatitis C register.
Right, yes.
In 1998, your dad was added to the register. Was he aware of that?
No, he wasn't.
You've provided the inquiry with a series of letters, so could we have 2028016, please? We can see that this is a letter to his treating consultant at the hospital from the National Blood Service. And it says in the first paragraph, as relatively little is known about HCV infection transmission or the clinical course of the resultant disease, a national register of HCV infections is being created. This register has been funded by the Department of Health and will provide a facility for the future monitoring and long-term assessment of HCV infection within the UK. The middle paragraph, if we just go down, Henry, in bold, indicates that no patient names will be sent to or held on the National HCV Register, but rather numbers will be used. And then the penultimate paragraph. I've also enclosed an information sheet explaining the purposes of the registry, which you may like to pass to your patient. No patient will be contacted directly. However, this information sheet has been provided for clinicians who feel they would like to notify patients of their inclusion in the register. Ethical approval for the register has been obtained from both the Public Health Laboratory Service and the UK Multi-Centre Research Ethics Committees. There is no formal requirement to gain patient consent. We then have a further letter in 2001, it's document 017, which indicates that your dad had been entered on the register, and there's a request in the second paragraph. We've been unable to trace any liver biopsy sections for this patient, so I've taken this opportunity to request the sections again, and they are requesting the treating doctor to provide to the register the specific histopathology if your dad had had any liver biopsies, to allow them to look at those samples. And then again, if we go to the next paragraph, Henry, we can see this note. Ethical approval for the collection of these biopsies has been obtained from both the Public Health Laboratory Service...
collation, I think, not...
apologies, the collation of these biopsies has been obtained from both the Public Health Laboratory Service and the Multi-Research Ethics Committees, and there is no formal requirement to gain patient consent. And note that the slides will be stored anonymously. Those slides were requested by the gastroenterologist from the pathologist and provided to the register. We've seen that in another document. And then we have a letter in 2006 from the National Register, the National HCV Register, in the second paragraph, in which they chase up any further information. It should be 013, please. Sorry. We've been unable to trace a follow-up form for this patient, so I've taken this opportunity to enclose another. We're very keen to document the outcome of HCV infection in this unique group of individuals, most of whom acquired their infections on a known date. I'd therefore be most grateful if you could complete the enclosed form, even if you've not seen the patient since the date of their last report. It requests summary information as well as details of any tests or treatment they've received since the date of their last report. Throughout that time frame of 1998 all the way through to the letter in 2006, was anyone in the family aware that he was registered?
No.
Or that samples were being provided to the register?
No.
Did he have any biopsies during that period that you know of?
He would have, yes. They took place on occasion. The purpose of which was certainly not, wasn't made aware that it was for a register or any form of your research on this basis.
We can see, sir, that there were sections provided to the HCV register for your dad. The document is 2028/018. If we could have that, Henry. It's a letter from the treating doctor to a histopathologist indicating that they've asked for 4 spare unstained sections of the liver biopsy specimens. And your understanding from other documents in the records that we don't have were that those 4 were provided to the register.
Yes.
In terms of your dad's treatment, he had a number of different courses over the years, including interferon. What was the effect of them on him?
They were really quite debilitating. He struggled enormously with the side effects. He would often be in bed. You know, he didn't have the energy to sit in a chair. He would be cold, have no appetite. It would really take a lot out of him. And it would worry us to see him this way. It was a struggle to watch. But Dad would say, and we would say, look, you don't have to do this. We can help. We can look at other things. And he would say, no, let's give it another week, because he always felt that an additional week might just bring that breakthrough that everyone is looking for. So he would push himself to suffer that little bit longer, just in case it brought the results. But he was very, very poorly.
In 2011, he was referred to the King's College Hospital in London to be considered for a liver transplant.
Yes.
But at that stage, it was thought that his liver disease was relatively stable, so there was no need for a transplant.
Yes,
Is that
he
right?
wasn't ill enough.
He then underwent further treatment in 2014 and cleared the virus in about 2015.
Yes.
And around that time, you found another letter in your dad's records from 2014, 2028012. It's a letter from Public Health England to your dad's GP, which says the above patient has been recently notified to us as being antibody positive for the hepatitis C virus. Do you have any idea why this letter was sent by Public Health England at that time?
No idea at all.
And we can see then in the second paragraph, there is discussion about if the patient is an injecting drug user or in relation to infections via sexual transmission. And you're quite unhappy about that paragraph.
Yes. It just shows this assumptions or everything that Dad feared that people thought. You then see official letters that suggest perhaps this person has caught hepatitis C through these means.
But there was nothing in August 2014, in your dad's treatment or anything at all that would suggest why this letter would be sent at that point.
Absolutely not. I mean, it is years upon years later from when his infection was found, and he would have been receiving treatment for hepatitis C and was just about to have that breakthrough of combating the virus.
Although your dad cleared the virus in 2015, his liver was cirrhotic and it wasn't in particularly good shape.
No.
In the documents from the hospital, they've said that the condition of his liver seemed to improve after he cleared the hepatitis C, and he was generally quite stable from a liver perspective. But the family's recollection is quite different, that in fact your father's condition was complex and he was unwell. Can you tell us about that?
With the original knee, the infection that Dad got in 1988, the approach to that was to bombard it with antibiotics, and they removed the knee and had medicated cement, and that's what led to the original knee replacement. The virus itself, it was believed that the virus had been combated, it was no longer there, but what we understand now is that that original virus had simply gone dormant, and with all of the treatments that Dad had with hepatitis C, it remained dormant until when Dad finally cleared hepatitis C, that infection, that original infection, then came back. So Dad was again suffering a very bad knee, a very bad infection, and they went to their original treatment where they removed his knee. They filled it with medicated cement and they bombarded him with antibiotics, and that was for months and months, maybe a year. And it was described to Mum as saying, look, this is so strong, it's like we're putting bleach through your husband's veins. And so that, obviously the original treatment was on a body that was a lot fitter than it is today, or was then. The cirrhosis of the liver, was suddenly working harder than it's worked for years. You know, Dad didn't drink, Dad didn't do all the things that he was told not to do in order to protect his liver. And when this infection came back, they felt they had no choice, but they did it, or I believe, you know, based on the man they knew many years ago.
And so the family have described that your dad's physical condition declined and he became very unwell.
Yes.
I just want to read a paragraph from your mum's statement because she described gradually becoming your father's carer. And she said this: "Becoming a full-time carer was a slow process. You start off accompanying your husband when he visits medical staff. Then you realise there are times when he simply cannot take in the latest news about his condition, so you step in on his behalf. You start to make notes, you come home and type them up and refer back to them at the next visit. Then you are the one who's remembering details neither your husband or the medical staff can recall. People start to rely on you and relay information to you so you can discuss it with your husband when he's ready. You become the expert on your husband's condition, prompting him to go to the doctor as you sense a change in his condition, or making sure he mentions something important when visiting consultants. You become the one breaking bad news to your children, to friends and extended family after your husband has received another setback, which he doesn't want to talk about. You're the only witness seeing the impact of another drug trial fail, noticing more symptoms emerge, and helplessly observing your husband's continued deterioration." And that's how your mum described what happened for her. You and your sister also took on responsibility with caring for your dad more and more.
Yes.
And you've said in your statement that your dad withdrew into himself even more and seemed to become resigned to his own demise.
Yes, it just seemed to be one piece of bad news after another. Something else would flare up, or and it would be high blood pressure. It could be bad skin. It could be piles. It could be the shaking of his hands. Just the thing. Then he would just be quite bemused as to why these things would be happening to him. He would say, "It's just another nail in my coffin. It's something that's just something else I've got to deal with." I don't think we know he didn't really appreciate that all of these things were because of hepatitis C. Because of the portal hypertension, which is the cirrhosis of the liver, that the complications that brings. He had varices, which were awful, and they were quite life-threatening at one point. So his esophagus, he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, and it was very painful. But he never saw it as one challenge. It was always a series of challenges, a series of things that he had to do. And of course, he would have to go and see other medical professionals and explain himself again. And this is where Mum got into the habit of being the one that is remembering and taking notes and reminding people about previous conversations, about how, reminding Dad to mention something that doesn't seem connected to that medical expert because they're concentrating on X. Just to mention this, just as an aside, just in case it has, a consequence.
In about 2016, your dad was assessed for a knee replacement because the medication for the infection wasn't resolving the issue with the knee. And a week before the surgery, it was noted that his liver was decompensating again. Was the family aware of this?
No. Not overtly. I think that the relationship Dad had with that doctor was a long-established relationship between doctor and patient. There was a lot of emotional sort of investment between the two of them in getting Dad better. And I think if it had been mentioned, Dad fully trusted this doctor, and with good reason. And there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing or anything like that. This doctor was keen to move ahead with it, and so those results, which in hindsight could possibly have been an indication of problems to come, and we've had it. We've had that independently looked at, and thoroughly investigated, and the results were that it could have been 50-50. Another doctor may have decided not to go ahead with that knee replacement. The doctor looking after Dad did, and with every hope and desire and professional opinion that it was going to be okay. And Dad trusted that doctor and went ahead. So if it was mentioned, it would have been mentioned in passing as a factor that's not stopping what we're doing.
He had the knee replacement surgery on the 16th of May,
Yes.
2016.
Mm-hmm.
But during the operation and afterwards, he suffered kidney failure.
Yes.
He was then moved to Derriford Hospital to receive specialist treatment for the kidneys and a possible liver transplant.
Yes.
He then underwent paracentesis to drain the fluid.
Mm-hmm.
But during the procedure, he suffered an internal bleed.
Yes.
And following on from that, you and the family feel there were a catalogue of errors,
Yes.
particularly in relation to dialysis.
Mm-hmm.
And the hospital have responded to say that the situation was very complex, and they would say there wasn't a failure to dialyse. And we're not going to go through those details because I understand that you don't particularly want to criticise and dig all of that up today. But the point you did want to make was that you feel there was a lack of joined up thinking about your dad's care.
Yes. With the emergency operation, because the paracentesis that caused the internal bleeding, and then the operation, the emergency operation to stop that bleeding, and the intensive care received afterwards, brought Dad back from the brink. And it took. I think the emergency operation was on the 2nd of July, and Dad regained consciousness on the 10th of July. So the emergency of bringing him back, but the complex nature of Dad's body, the cirrhosis and the weaknesses that he had, it was when intensive care, he moved from there to a general ward, and then you've got doctors who are looking at the patient and looking at symptoms that are presented. They're not looking at the silent killer in the room almost. They've got this, this other element in the room where they're not picking up on the subtleties of a liver that can't process the drugs. I mean, an anaesthetic is a poison, so your body has to process it out. Dad's kidneys had already failed and were not getting any better, and they're giving more drugs. The records show Mum continuously asking for dialysis, which in our opinion was of use. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion, and we're not crossing into any criticisms at all. But for the point of the inquiry, the one thing that we want to highlight is the fact that we knew Dad, we knew his body, we knew what he'd been through. And as a family, when you're talking about that individual, we were the experts in the room. We were the ones who knew that he was just slipping away from us. We could see it. And we knew that he needed assistance, he needed help. And it wasn't just what was being presented to the doctors physically. We knew there was more. And it just seems that for ourselves, the expertise that we had, that knowledge that we had, was not listened to. We were treated as silent observers, in our opinion. We were treated as people who were there to care for the patient, but not to guide any care for that patient. And it's one of the things that we do struggle with, the fact that we felt so helpless when Dad was so very poorly and so needed intervention that took all of this into account. And we had that history, we had that knowledge, and we felt we were not being listened to, that knowledge, that history wasn't being taken into account. So everything that was being put into Dad, everything that was, trying to help with something, in the end was just poisoning him.
You said before that, before today, that the family felt that the doctors treating your dad had very limited understanding of hepatitis C and very limited understanding of the ripple effect of hepatitis C in relation to the physical consequences of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that in those circumstances, what you as a family were saying needed to be heard even more than normal.
Yes, yes. The one thing that we've learned is that when someone is infected, if they go down, they go down fast and they go down hard, and it's very difficult for medical professionals to manage that because they're trying to respond to what they're dealing with at the time. You know, at the minute, immediately, they're responding to that, and quite rightly so. But there is this this background that we have, and I think the one thing that I would personally point out to the inquiry, to people listening, is to speak to your loved ones, speak to the people who are infected, and register power of attorney with for those people. If we'd have done that, we didn't have that, and if we had have done that, we would have had conversations with Dad to say, you know, this is how we speak up for you. This is what we will do. This is how we will, you know, what do you want us to do? To say on your behalf. If we had power of attorney, we would have felt more empowered to speak up for Dad. You know, we felt overwhelmed by the situation. It happened so quickly, and things that we were asking for were not being responded to, sometimes not even being acknowledged. Noted, and we've got medical records that have Mum repeatedly asking for dialysis. But she remembers that whilst they're noting it, they're not answering, they're nodding and then going off to the next patient. You don't feel that you're able to step up. And I think if we had power of attorney over Dad, certainly, you know, from the medical side of things, we would have been more able, or felt more able to intervene with his care.
And sadly, your father suffered from hepatic encephalopathy. He had some seizures and was then provided with palliative care until he died on the 24th of July, 2016. Can you tell us something of the impact of your father's death on you and your sister and your mum?
The way we lost Dad was traumatic. It was not... there was nothing gentle about it. And we had, you know, my dad's sister came down to see him because she knew he was in trouble. She's 11 years older than him. She was not expecting to say goodbye to her little brother. Following the death of Dad, we've all lost a huge influence in our lives. Doesn't matter how we as children help Mum, she doesn't have that voice that says, Jane is fine. Jane, don't worry about it. My brother has lost his mentor. My brother is a builder. My dad was in the building trade. He taught Stuart loads. But not only about practical stuff, about customers, about running a business. Stuart doesn't have anyone now that's able to offer that really, you know, that advice and guidance. My sister, as I say, she's lost her best friend. And throughout my 40s, I've been the problem child in the family, going through divorce, family breakdown, finding new love, and Dad would just think it through and go, it's okay. All you needed to hear from Dad was, I understand. He was the head of our family. He was the heart of our... He was the heart of our family, and we are, in varying degrees, are all lost without him.
Your mum has had some added worries in terms of finances. Your mum and dad received stage 1 payment, and then your dad said he would receive a stage 2 payment. Your understanding is that he had a choice between monthly payments or a lump sum.
Yes.
And your dad chose to take monthly payments.
Mm-hmm.
You're unhappy about that. Can you tell us about that?
Well, again, this, even, with hepatitis and all this sort of situation, the whole thing is complex. When Mum was caring for Dad, she reduced her hours at work in order to provide support for him. Mum was on a final salary pension, and reducing her hours obviously reduced her final salary, so she has had an impact financially on that, something that you don't think of at the time, because your immediate concern is your husband. And so when it came to the payments, Dad decided to take it monthly, so they had it coming in on a regular basis. But obviously we lost Dad far sooner than we anticipated. And we honestly don't believe that those payments have stopped. And Mum doesn't have that financial security or that regular income. There are alternatives which you may cover, but we just don't think there was because it's linked to someone. And as I say, when the infected are, when there are complications, they go quickly, and there's no sort of way of balancing out that for the other individuals who are left, who rely on that financial support. It doesn't seem to be that whatever the lump sum was, that the difference is paid, or that there's some sort of way of continuing or anything. It ceased immediately.
Your mum was moved to the EIBSS, but she's constantly worried about the EIBSS payments. What's her concern?
After Dad passed and those payments stopped, EIB they asked her to fill in a form and to give 3 months of financial statements, which Mum did, and the result came back, and it was confirmed that she would receive a regular payment through that support system, but no explanation as to how they came to this conclusion. There was nothing for us to double check or qualify, and Mum's initial response, because it was an improved payment to what she had previously, but Mum would take it out of her account and put it into us and hide it in another account, because she was convinced that they were going to come back and say, we've made an error, because we had nothing to confirm what was correct. And now it is a yearly response. So Mum last year has filled the forms in, given the 3-month statements. Her financial situation has not improved. Her costs have certainly increased. And this time her payments have gone down, and they've gone down by a significant amount per month. And again, no explanation as to why. So you have nothing to challenge. And Mum doesn't feel that she has financial security. It is a constant concern that this annual event and this annual result will dictate whether she's, how she is for that forthcoming year. But it doesn't have any other, she can't think long term, money wise. She hasn't got a long term. She's got an annual basis, that's it.
Those are the questions I have for you. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Locke and Ms. Gibbs if there's anything they want me to raise. Just 2 points that they'd like me to raise. They've asked that I read out a section from your mum's statement in relation to the financial security question. And it's, she says this, I just want to find the context of the paragraph, if I can have a moment. Yes. She discusses the discrepancy in payments of £25,000 and £40,000. And she says this, £25,000 doesn't go a long way if you have to keep a family or have to keep your house going. I'd like to say I did receive a sum as a widow's one-off payment, whereas that helped immediately with expenses. It angered me because I looked after my husband from 1995 to 2016. This payment made me feel that I was a very cheap carer for the government. And that was your mum's view. And earlier you were discussing the lack of joined-up care and the family's concern about that. And they've asked me to just highlight a particular exhibit. It's 2028009, please, Henry. And it's the first 3 paragraphs. Thank you very much for taking over the care of this gentleman and they're requesting advice regarding a problem with LFTs. This was in 2003. And the letter says this, he came in for a routine check of blood and we spotted his ALT had risen to 100, his platelet count had fallen to 131. I've included a printout. On reviewing the reasons for this, I suddenly realised to my horror that he's been taking nizatidine for over 5 years. It was started by my previous senior partner, and unfortunately Mr. Root's prescriptions are being issued by my senior partner's successor. On further investigation of his medication, I discovered that the cephradine, which he takes for prophylaxis of infection in his knee, the transfusion for which originally caused his hepatitis C, is also labelled in the BNF as causing liver abnormalities and thrombocytopenia. And there is a request for someone to liaise over a choice of an alternative drug. That was a letter from the GP to the hospital specialist, and they asked us to highlight that exhibit as a good example. Martin, do you have anything else you would like to say?
I have a statement that Mum has prepared that she's asked me to read out on her behalf. Get my glasses, that would help. My husband's life was cut short because the government decided to continue to use untreated, infected blood. They not only ruined my husband's life, they ruined my life and our family life. As with all couples, we had plans for the future long into our old age. This was taken away from us in a most cruel way. I had to watch my husband die bit by bit, year after year, knowing I could do nothing. I was a loving wife who became a carer and suffered every step with my husband. I hope this inquiry will make the government admit to their horrendous actions, and I thank Sir Brian, his support staff, and all the legal teams for their hard work. And just a short statement from myself. I'd just like to point out that you don't need to win to be a hero. Dad's demonstrated a quiet determination across the years and throughout his life with all the areas of challenges that he's faced. There was no fuss, no bother. Dad would face all his disappointments, all the setbacks, all the frustrations, and he would simply pick himself up, dust himself down, and stand tall and face the next round. I'm so proud of my dad. My dad is my hero. My dad is my hero. Thank you.
Well, I don't know why you're thanking us. It's we who should be thanking you. Your direct and powerful evidence commenting on things revealed by the records, balanced by the equally powerful, rather different way in which you've shown the rawness of grief, and reminded us sometimes it's just the very little things, when you remember them, that make the throat choke and the eyes fill. Things like when he first mentioned his desire to make sure that no one cleaned up blood which he'd spilled. When it affected you personally, you showed clearly how much everything mattered. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break to 11:30. 11:30.